Hello, thank you for accessing this video on local history publishing. It's one of several posted on the Hampshire Field Club YouTube channel. It records a Zoom session held by the Hampshire Archives Trust and the Hampshire Field Club in January 2021. It was chaired by Sue Woolgar, Secretary of the Hampshire Archives Trust, and was attended by more than 60 participants. It's the first in a series of presentations on the theme of hands-on local history, that is, activities common to many local history groups and how best to carry them out. Under the title Local History Publishing, Why, What, How, the video starts with an overview by Roger Otterwill of the various kinds of local history publications produced in Hampshire. It continues with suggestions by me, Barry Sherlock, on how to develop publishing projects and bring them to fruition. The video focuses on printed publications, but a lively Q&A session at the end touches on technical aspects of the process of turning copy and pictures into a product. It's hoped at some future date to run a Zoom session devoted entirely to this theme. We hope you enjoy the video and suggest you look out for announcements of future joint presentations by the Hampshire Archives Trust and the Hampshire Field Club. Please direct any comments to me. That's barrysherlock@gmail.com. And it's Sherlock spelled S-H-U-R-L-O-C-K. Thank you very much indeed. And now over to Roger.
This evening, as you all know, we're going to consider these three questions: why publish, what publish, and how to publish. My job is relatively straightforward. I'm going to briefly suggest answers to the first two of these questions, why and what, and then Barry will go on to elaborate in much greater detail responses to the how question. So if I could have the next slide, please. There are basically, in our view, four main reasons why local history groups do publish or might consider publishing. And the first of these is quite straightforwardly to keep members and other interested parties informed. That's point 1, 2. And what this involves, Barry will say a little bit more about what sorts of things local history groups might want to inform others about. A second reason is to encourage research, local history research, of course. Many of us are engaged in this activity, and many of us are often motivated by the knowledge that the results of our labours, our research labours, can reach a wider audience through a publication of some kind. Thus, a third reason for publishing is the third reason is the dissemination of research findings. And that then leads on, as you disseminate research findings, to a fourth reason for publishing, which is the showcasing of aspects of the history of an area covered by a local history group. So, given those four reasons for publishing, the next question is what to publish. And on this slide, there is a minuscule selection of the enormous range and variety of publications from groups in Hampshire. In other words, this is the tip of an enormous iceberg. To the best of our knowledge, there are no records of the numbers of publications annually or in total relating to aspects of local history in Hampshire, but we can guess that it's probably into 4 figures at least. In considering the what question, we're primarily concerned, and at least I'm primarily concerned, with providing an overview of the different categories of publication. And I did some research during lockdown, drawing mainly on information from local history group websites. And from this, we would suggest that there are, broadly speaking, 4 categories of publication. So if I could have the next slide, please. The first of these categories is the newsletter. And as you can see from this table, there are many and varied types of newsletter in terms of frequency of publication, whether or not they're available online, and all sorts of other variables such as the style, the format, content. And the final column on this table indicates whether the newsletter is available on the website in the form of a PDF file. Now, at this point, a very important disclaimer is in order, accompanied by an apology for those that have been missed. And we're sure that there are a number that will have been missed. So as an aside, please do let us know if you are aware of any group newsletter which hasn't been listed, and we can then amend our table accordingly. We would like to try and make this as accurate as possible. So moving on to the next slide, please, and the second category of publication, namely the journal. As you can see, there are fewer journals than there are newsletters, but there are still quite a number. The table indicates the year in which publication began, the frequency of publication, the number of issues to date insofar as we can ascertain them, and whether or not it has an ISSN number. And Barry will explain a little bit about the significance and what that stands for later on. Now, again, apologies if any have been missed. Sadly, we know of at least 2 local history group journals that ceased publication in recent years, so they come and go. One of those is Fareham Past and Present, and the other is the Journal of the Southampton Local History Forum. There may well be others which we don't know about that had shorter lives in the past. The third category, next slide please, comprises booklets and occasional papers. As can be seen, these often constitute series, of which some of the best known are the Hampshire papers and Portsmouth papers. And some of these series have evolved over time. Again, we may have missed some, so if you know of any that we ought to record, please do let us know. Now, I'm speaking from Southampton, and my Hampshire connections are all around this area. And to the best of my knowledge, there's never been a Southampton paper series. Currently, the emphasis in Southampton is on developing their Sotonopedia website. And so finally, we come to the last category of publication, and the one that's most familiar, I'm sure, which is books. And again, a very large number of publications. 2 very recent ones are shown there by way of illustration. Now, I haven't formally defined any of these categories, since Barry will be indicating their key features. My role has simply been to outline the framework within which Barry will consider the all-important question of how to publish. So over to Barry.
Right, well, thank you very much, Roger. Thank you, Sue, for a nice introduction, and Roger for setting the scene. I mean, there really is a colossal amount of material out there, and much of it contains a lot of very rich research carried out over the years. I think really, I'd just like to mention, in addition, of course, the run of the Hampshire Field Club proceedings, which go back to the 1880s, now called Hampshire Studies. And also, if I can put a plug in for the Hampshire Archives Trust newsletter, which has been around for 35 years. These runs provide an enormous resource for people who are seriously interested in knowing about the past. I'd also mention the Cope collection in the University of Southampton. This was a collection of books by an antiquarian, and there are some very rare books from the past, many of which contain material you can't get any other way. So just as a bit of background, I spent the first 15 years of my life as a commissioning editor in London. In other words, my job was to find books and authors and publish them. And then for 30 years or so, I worked as a journalist, writing on medicine of all things. So since the mid-80s, I've had an strong interest in local history, which is, amongst other things, a very pleasant relief from death and disease. There's obviously a difference between professional publishing, which is to make money, and local history publishing, which mainly has other objectives, but there are many parallels. One important message I'd like to get across is that publishing is just common sense. It's more common sense than it is rocket science, but there is good publishing and bad publishing. Now, I know of the 56 people or so who've logged in this evening, for which I'm most grateful. I'm sure Roger is too. There are many writers, editors and publishers amongst you, and I'm sure we all have our own views on how to do it. So I hope that this will lead to some interesting discussions, and if you think I've got anything wrong or there are better ways of doing things, please let me know. We can all always learn. So next slide, Sue. Now, this image is a nice image. I think it's an interesting bit of publishing. It's about something you wouldn't think was going on around here, growing tobacco. It's a nice bit of artwork, and Phil has done a good job there. So, publishing, what is publishing? Well, it really has three phases. You've got editorial. This is sometimes called pre-press. It's collecting material, getting words and pictures together, even film, moulding it into some sort of form, which leads to copy and illustrations. When you've got through that phase, the next phase is production. That's turning this copy and illustrations into some sort of product rather. It might be a pamphlet, it might be a book, it might be a CD, increasingly it might be a blog. And then once you've got your product, the next thing is marketing. Marketing, quite obviously, is letting people know that it exists and providing some means for them to get it, and if need be, collecting money. Marketing, in my experience in local history, is often either completely ignored or forgotten about until the end, whereas it is productive to think about it fairly early on. Otherwise, you're going to end up with a pile of paper in the garage. So these three phases of publishing will recur throughout the rest of my presentation. So the next slide, please, Sue. Now, this is one of the VCH shorts, which are coming out and hopefully will provide a new form of publication, but it's going to take many years. So what do we need in order to publish? First of all, you need an editor. You might not be called an editor, but you need someone who looks out for ideas, makes things happen, molds the idea into something that's got maximum impact. And he and she will need to consider the nature of the subject, what period, just the parish or wider, be concerned about sources, are there available sources, and illustrations. And then obviously there needs to be an author or a series of authors. And it's a good idea early on to get some idea of what you're producing, how many pages cost, etc. These will lead to a plan, or should lead to a plan. I suspect mostly there isn't a plan, but a plan should have an outline content, some sort of deadlines, softish probably, this being an amateur activity, and some estimate of cost. The final product will almost always be different from the plan, but a poor plan is better than none at all. And then, having got the plan, having got the author, having got the subject, unless you carry out editorial chasing, very little will happen. So polite engagement from time to time is a good idea. Most authors, in my experience, and I talk as an author and also as a publisher, most authors welcome talking over their project from time to time, discussing major decisions about how to proceed, getting around problems, etc., etc. And when the manuscript is well advanced, it's a very good idea for someone else to read it and politely feedback comments. Nothing that has ever been drafted is not bettered by having someone else to read it. Having got the copy and illustrations to a state you're happy with, you've then got to produce the product. Now, this will require certain IT skills, links probably with a local printer or a webmaster. I'll go into that in a little bit more detail later on. And then finally, as I've emphasized before, you need to let people know that it's around and how to obtain it. That's often a blind spot I find in local publishing. You know something exists, but to get hold of it is often quite difficult. Next slide, please, Sue. Right, so the first kind of publication I'm considering, as Roger outlined, is the newsletter. Newsletters almost create themselves. No organization can exist without one. And always, as always, the key thing is to have someone called an editor who's in close touch with events and is good at collecting copy. Contributions are always welcome, but rarely arrive. In my experience, if you want some copy, the best thing is to pick up the phone and talk to somebody who knows something, write down what they've written, what they've told you, send it to them, and then they will correct it. It's often much less stressful than waiting for somebody else to write it, but this is a personal choice. So here are some of the areas that newsletters cover. They're fairly obvious, they speak for themselves, I think. But so we've got editorials, events, meetings and talks, short articles, which are often useful ways of airing a subject before doing it in more depth, reviews of interesting books, locally and nationally, members coming and going, and then the standard pleas. We all want volunteers, we all want new members, and we all want people to write articles. Finally, and I think this is something I can't overemphasize, please index your newsletter. If you index it issue by issue, it will be relatively easy. If you've got a big pile of 20, or in the case of the Hampshire newsletter, which we've got 60 and we're doing an index, it is a hell of a job. But there, an index is worth almost as much as the publication itself. This is the Hampshire Archives Trust newsletter, by the way, always with a nice colourful map on the front. Maps are, of course, a great joy. So the next image, Sue, please. Newsletters will be different depending on the needs of the group, but here are a few things I suggest you go for. Try and make them colourful and attractive, and get an international standard serial number. I'll talk about that later on, but this makes it real, gets it into national bibliographies, and when we're all long dead, and people have forgotten that there's a newsletter of Sticksville, somebody will be able to find it. Also, I think that I'd like to mention photographs. If you know, we all know about photographs, but how many people have events, go to visits, have talks, never take a photograph? And they're absolutely invaluable in newsletters. So collect more photographs than you can possibly use. And then something I've got a bit of a thing about, I think you should always put contact details for authors. Data protection is widely misunderstood and seems to be leading to complete anonymity of authors. But always put a contact for authors, and I'll go into that a little bit more later on. Next slide, please, Sue. And then we come on to journals. Of course, journals are a collection of material that's been carefully researched and edited and is there for future generations, like the Hampshire Field Club proceedings. Although newsletters need to be edited, of course, the level of consideration for journals should be a step higher, as they are quasi-academic. I hope they're less hard-going than some academic journals, by the way. So, journals will generally include a number of articles on different subjects, perhaps even a theme, though that's often quite difficult. And I cannot emphasize enough that full references should be given. Even over-referencing is okay. It can be extremely frustrating to find a very useful article with material you never heard of, and nobody indicates where they got the information from. It's collecting references is a bit of a bore. It's best done as you write the article, because otherwise at the end you've then got to do a lot of research to find out where you found out the stuff. But if as you go along you make a note of where you found it out, then at the end it will be a relatively easy job to make a list of journals, a list of references. Now, we all have ideas about format and layout, but I like formats that are smaller than A4, rather like the VCH shorts, like 250 by 180 millimeters. Crown quarter, it used to be called in the old days. And I personally think it's a good idea to list the articles and authors on the back cover. When you've got a pile of these in your bookcase, if you can pull it out and just look at the back and you see what's inside, it's easier than ferreting around in the prelims. Think also carefully about the captions, give adequate descriptions of the illustrations and where they came from. And just a couple of other things. I mentioned earlier international standard serial numbers. These are free and obtained from the British Library online. If you have an online edition as well as a print edition, you need a separate ISSN. They are in effect what a supermarket would call a product number. And they enable bibliographers to catalogue material, handle it on computers, and it's free, so why not do it? I'm going to bang on again about authors having contact details. The reason for that is if you give a contact, you'll often find you get more information from readers, something you didn't know about. You'll even, forgive the thought, have errors corrected. It's, if you don't publish anything, you don't make any errors. If you publish something, inevitably there will be some errors. And it's simply to facilitate links between researchers. If you see an article with someone who's interested in something you're interested in, there's nothing better than getting online or on the phone and sharing information. An email address is the obvious thing. Under data protection, of course, authors have the right to decline, but why would you? The next slide, please, Sue. Now, papers and booklets. These are obviously a stage on from an article. Some articles turn out to be so long, they might be considered as separate publications, like the Hampshire papers of the Hampshire Record Office and the Hampshire Field Club that Roger mentioned, and the Portsmouth papers, etc. I have in mind perhaps something of the order of 10, 15,000 words plus illustrations. Having said that, it's an editorial decision whether to publish a booklet. Some very long articles benefit from cutting or moulding into something shorter. We all love every little detail we research, but if somebody else reads it, they may suggest that something is really not that important, or excessive detail can be put in an appendix in smaller type or dealt with these days online as an appendix. Many academic papers are like that. The detail is often just online. Also, some long papers may be sensibly subdivided and published as 2 articles or 3 articles in the journal rather than one large paper. These are editorial decisions. Many of the points here are similar to journals. I suggest that they are refereed, they're read by somebody else. They're properly referenced or illustrated, and go for an attractive title and cover. And then just a final point there, which I put in, we often write about our locality without having to explain where things are or what they are or who they are. But I think with a paper you can expect a bigger audience, and so therefore be sure that you explain what would be obvious to a local person so that people know what you're talking about. Next slide, please, Sue. Now, this is Farming the Valley. This was a book financed by the Hampshire Archives Trust and produced by the Eastmead Local History Group. It's a very fine book, nicely designed, beautifully researched, and a mine of information. It'll be there for years. Now, books are obviously more of a commitment than journal articles or papers. Sometimes they grow over the years from earlier works. Sometimes they're one-offs, perhaps the only decent source on a small village, like Dr. Joseph Stevens on St. Marybourne. He went off to found Reading Museum. Or more recently, Jill Palmer on Vernham Dean, the only book I think on the village. Even when a single author is involved, remember that you will gain an awful lot from picking as many brains as possible. Of course, giving credit for where you find the information, but don't hesitate to talk to lots of people about things you don't fully understand, or to get their views on things, or compare what you find out with what they find out. In this way, the book will be better. None of us knows it all. Positive networking is thoroughly recommended. I emphasize again, and more particularly for a book, references and an index. A book without an index is the most frustrating thing. You know it was in there somewhere, but you can't find it, or you can't be sure if it's in there. With an index, you can do it in seconds, minutes. If you don't know how to produce an index, just take a few books off your bookshelf and have a look. It's pretty straightforward. There are specialist sources on indexing, but it can get a little bit boring. So I suggest just look at the books on the bookshelf and come up with something that's similar. There are certain conventions like cross-references, see also, normally in italic. And the normal thing is that when you're giving an organisation like Hampshire Archives Trust, that would be initial capitals. If you're putting in archives, it would be lowercase a. But these are not very important conventions, but you'll see them if you just look at other books. Now, finance. As regards finance, there are a variety of grant-giving bodies, including the Hampshire Archives Trust. Also, you can arrange a subscription. This is an old-fashioned way of financing books, but can be very effective. In other words, you've got a local history book. You tell people of every meeting you can that it's coming and that it's available at a low price prior to publication. And you can get the money before you even print it. In fact, good professional publishing, I have to admit, is ideally you get the money for printing the book before you pay the printer. That's good publishing. Also, a lower pre-publication price encourages sales. If the book is being published for £15 and people can get it for a tenner, they will reach into their pockets more readily. Also, one thing, I don't intend to go into the technicalities of printing, partly because I don't know what they are, but the thing is that everybody these days knows that with modern techniques of printing, short runs with full colour illustrations, which once used to be prohibitively expensive, and I can remember when I was publishing in London, we used to go all around the world to get them printed. Now you can get short runs, colour printing from your local printer, and the cost is relatively small. Of course, you will need a local printer who can help you produce a suitable file. I'm sure many of you are used to systems like Microsoft Publisher and other publishing systems, or you can do it simply with just a file laid out in a conventional fashion. But it's a good idea to have a chat with your printer before you get that far. He will put you straight. He'll tell you what sort of file he can deal with best. You can talk with him about the production, whether you want the cover laminated, which you probably will, whether you're going to go for paperback or hardback, details of the binding, all the sort of things that make a good product. And don't forget to put the name of the book on the spine. Otherwise, when it sits in the bookcase, it won't be visible. And make sure it goes the right way up. Otherwise, you'll get a crick in the neck, I should say, or even a crook in the neck. So, and then next slide, please, Sue. Now, this is a slide about titles. The first title, A History of Romsey Inns. Now, if you were writing a book on that subject, that would say what's in it. It's accurate, but it's fairly sort of straightforward. So if you were publishing that book, you might call it "So Drunk He Must Have Been to Romsey." And many of you know that that, of course, was the title chosen by the Romsey Local History Society for its first book. And they tell me it's still in print. They can't stop it selling, more or less. And there's a third alternative you might think about there. You're in the strong country. If you know Hampshire, you'll know that that used to be the advertising slogan of Strong's, the brewers. And so my point there is just think about the title. Try and make it reasonably accurate, but don't be pedantic about it. And the book, the title ought to say what's in the book and ought to attract people. You'll sell more copies and more people will pick it up and open it up. Now, the next book is called A Social History of Basingstoke. That's what the book's about. That's what's in it. But how about calling it Basingstoke's Contribution to World Culture? Now, this is actually a published book. And it's very well researched. It's very readable. It's a thoroughly commendable bit of local history publishing. But the author didn't call it A Social History of Basingstoke or a Basingstoke miscellany. He called it Basingstoke's Contribution to World Culture. And so you see it and you immediately get caught with the title. And the third example I've got here is Dear Lily, The Letters of Private Rose, 1880-1917. Now that's a charming title. I think you get the idea what it's about. There's another title there, Letters from the Trenches. And you can always modify a main title with a subtitle. So you can have a main title that is catchy or is solid. I mean, you know, just think of the film Jaws, you know, a film about sharks. It wasn't called a film about sharks, it was called Jaws. So Letters from the Trenches, I think you immediately get the idea what the book is. And then as a subtitle, you might say, Dear Lily, Private Rose to Dear Lily, blah, blah, blah. In other words, you can modify your main title. And then there's a third possibility there that is perhaps equally catchy, Muds, Rats and Boredom. So this is a book that was published and was called Letters from the Trenches. So what I'm saying there is, as you write the book, as you prepare it, think about the titles, have a working title, try it with friends. From time to time, you'll come up with silly titles that won't work, but in the end, you'll get a title that will do justice to the book and hopefully help it to sell. So next slide, please, Sue. Right, now this is Diana Caldicott's book on Elizabethan Andover. I like the cover, I think it's intriguing. And like all Diana's book, it's meticulously researched, meticulously referenced, and an absolute joy. And more than that, she knows all about references. I don't think she's listening in today. But anyway, a few other considerations about books. Books should have an international standard book number. This is the product number. It's like the ISSN. It's been around for probably 40 years, I think. I can't remember when they came in, but they've been around for a very long time. As soon as computers got involved with bibliography, ISBNs came in. And they would get your book in the National Bibliography. They would get your book on the catalogue of the British Library. So, and it's almost a duty, I think, to get one. Now, they can be purchased from the Nielsen ISBN store online, at my view, for a criminally high price. They're really using as a cash cow. It's a great pity because they used to be free. But a local printers often have a run of ISBNs and will probably sell you one at a lower price. I know that Sarson Press and Winchester do that. Of course, technically, they are then the publisher. But I think if you're a local history group, I don't think one's terribly fussy about who the publisher really is. I mean, in a sense, the printer is the publisher. In fact, publishers used to be called printers and started off as printers. Second point, there may be issues of copyright. I can give no legal advice about copyright, but having worked with copyright all my working life, I would suggest that for non-profit ventures in which you are not stealing the work of somebody earning a living, nor impugning any subject, I have never known any legal action in this setting. And if anybody were to set up a legal action, it would be under English law, it would have to be just for damages, and they'd find it very difficult to prove any damages. I do think, having said that, if you have an image, if you want to use an image, you can try and find out who it belongs to. It's a good idea because, first of all, it's a simple courtesy to credit them. Secondly, it may be described as something quite wrongly. And when you contact somebody, they say, oh, yes, that was wrongly captioned, and so on. So by all means, respect copyright and respect ownership, but don't be prevented from using an image just because you can't find out who owns it. Online images, I use online images, and I always try and find out who they belong to, and I have never known anyone say no. They're delighted that you want to use their image. The next thing is deposit libraries. Legally, every published book should be sent to an address in Edinburgh for distribution for the record to the libraries of Oxford and Cambridge, the British Library, the National Library of Wales, and Trinity College Dublin. There's an empire hangover, isn't it? Not Belfast, Dublin. Now, this is not policed, but if you want your book to be available to anyone in the future, I think it's a decent gesture. So what you do is you parcel out 5 copies of the book, send them to an address in Edinburgh, which you can get online, and they will then make sure that they're distributed to these major libraries. So should there be a fire in the future, you've got 5 chances of your book surviving. Another thing I'd mention, which is not on here, but don't forget review copies. It's obvious review copies to the local press, but also the Hampshire Field Club, the Hampshire Archives Trust, but also national publications like the Local Historian, Family and Community History, etc. The Local Historian at the back will list anything you send them, a paper, a newsletter, an issue of your journal. And I think it's well worth doing this. And of course, reviews are a very useful way of getting people to know about your book. You don't charge for review copies, of course, you send them free. And if somebody phones you up, you tell them all about it. So here is my final slide. Sue?
Yes, sorry, was paying attention really.
I'm just following my own advice here. There are a few references here to things that you will find useful. Anybody involved in publishing uses Hart's rules, which tell you things like where to capitalize and what Latin, short Latin terms mean and how you should present them. Bill Bryson has produced a book called Troublesome Words, in which he explains why it's perfectly okay to start a sentence with and all sorts of other useful things. And then there is a very long website source there, which would tell you more about indexing than you probably need to know. And then at the end, I've written an article for the Local Historian, which is coming out in July, and will probably be rather similar to this. So, a final comment. I've of course dealt with publishing as print, but increasingly we are all moving into publishing as online, blogs, downloadable PDFs, etc., etc. But 95% of publishing doesn't really matter what you do in the final stage. And whether you're publishing on a platform or whether you're printing something, the processes of molding the product and referencing it properly, indexing it, and presenting it in a way that will make it attractive, it's all the same game with slight differences. So, in summary, successful publishing, in my view, is largely common sense and good judgment, and it will generally build with time. You might start with an exhibition, leading to a newsletter article, leading to a longer journal article, or perhaps a longer paper, and then a book, which will hopefully be around for a very long time. Thank you very much.
It's been largely talking about printed format, printed material. If you do go down the path of digital publication only, and they're only interested if you do it just digitally and nowhere else, there is a BL site, British Library site, where you can submit digital publications. They put it up on their systems for no cost, and other people can access them. And a note of caution, well, not a note of caution exactly, but just to warn you, if you do submit to the 5 copyright libraries through the BL portal, for instance, our own newsletter, the Hampshire Archives Trust newsletter, and we normally used to publish 3 a year. If you stop publishing 3 a year, they will chase you for the 3rd publication of the year. So be aware, once you're on their list, they will keep a close eye on you. Right, I'll turn to the chat now and stop saying too much more. And we have got a question or an observation from one of our participants, who asks Roger to say perhaps a little bit more about HRO, or now called HAL's blogs, but I'm not sure if that's really in your ballpark, because that's a Hampshire Record Office, isn't it, rather than Hampshire Field Club. But do you want to say something about that, Roger?
Well, yes, I've contributed to the Record Office blog, a couple of items last year, and it's a very good way of getting some material out quickly. I can't remember the young lady's name now. I assume she was a young lady, one of the Hampshire Record Office staff. If the questioner would like to email me, I can put her in touch with the person that handles the blog at the Record Office, and I'll happily do that. What they like you to do is to take an item or items within the record that the Record Office has got in its collection, in its archive, and write something about that, about the items, and how you've researched them, and the value that you've drawn from them, and to say a little bit about the setting, the context of the items. I don't think I can say any more at this point in general terms on that, but as I say, I'll happily deal with the questioner on a one-to-one basis through email. So please do get in touch.
Thank you, Roger. Another question for Barry this time. Kindle is very popular for fiction, someone observes. How much is it used for non-fiction?
I don't have a figure for that. I mean, it is used for non-fiction, but I mean, it depends. I think the whole thing about electronic publishing is quite interesting. I mean, as long as I've been in publishing, somebody has popped up and said, print's finished. Mm. It started off with microfiche. Everything was going to be on microfiche. And then everything was going to be on CD-ROM. And of course, everything is going to be online. But it seems to me that the more people say that electronic publishing is the way forward, the more dirty paper is produced. I mean, we're reading more books and buying more books than ever, I think. The newspapers, of course, are losing out enormously. But I think, I mean, I read Kindle, and I endlessly use electronic sources, but I think that we've also got lots of platforms and formats in our drawers and bookcases that we can't access anymore. And so I'm afraid I'm old-fashioned enough to believe that in the long run, it is the printed product. I mean, the book really is a brilliant device. Nobody thought it was a device, but it was the first communication device. I mean, apart from monkish manuscripts, but the printed book, particularly from, 1700s onwards, when the licensing legislation was abandoned, it's an incredibly useful, versatile thing. And we're all used to leafing through and making pencil notes and whatever. And I think that if you've got a really well-written, well-researched, valuable book product, as it were. I think just to put it on something electronic is risking it disappearing at some stage. Whereas if you have it on paper, I think it will survive. So, I mean, that's just my observation, that every decade or so, there's a new platform comes along that's going to sweep away the printed product. But it's failed, it doesn't. So
there's another query, Barry, on a similar, before you depress her too much, the lady who asked this question, she wants any advice you might like to give about publishing an ebook. So apart from the fact that it may be that her product is not there forever, but
I have no idea. Do you know how to publish ebooks, Roger?
Well, no, I mean, I was just going to interject and say, I think this could be a generational thing. I'm certainly of a generation where the satisfaction that I get from seeing the result of my research is having something in my hand. I'm quite happy for there to be a version that's virtual, it's digital, but there is still that having a printed version in front of me. That's the thing that gives me my greatest satisfaction. And frankly, if you're thinking of just publishing in an ebook form, to be perfectly honest, I would say think again. As Barry said, you can have, for printed publications, you can have very short print runs. So, you know, if you're worried about cost and everything, I think that it can be done quite economically now. So that's just a personal view, but I'm speaking from the heart here.
I think, Roger, I think most of us would agree that things like newsletters are probably going to become entirely electronic.
Yeah, I think that's possible.
I think that's probably going to happen. I mean, it probably is an intergenerational thing, but as I say, more or less the first day I walked into a publishing office, there was an old guy sitting in the corner, and he said, you know, you've come into a dead industry, mate. But he was wrong.
Can we move on, because we've got a few more chat questions. I'll say a little bit about this one first, if I may, and then Barry and Roger do jump in. The observation is about the Ordnance Survey saying it's hot on copyright, or isn't that longer the case? Well, they are hot on copyright, is my understanding, but they also, if you're talking about using maps, they have Crown copyright assigned to those, so you can use anything over 50 years old without being any fear of being sued or anything by the Ordnance Survey. But you're right, for more recent material, they are very hot, because they have a series of licenses which you have to buy to use more recent material, and that's why they're quite keen, obviously, on their commercial side of the operation. Do you want to add anything, Barry or Roger, to that? Or?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, as I said when I was talking about copyright, if you're stealing something from somebody who's trying to make a living, that's just not on, and that's what the Ordnance Survey comes in. But the National Library of Scotland has a wonderful website, and you can access Ordnance Survey maps at all sorts of scales. It's not a complete run, but you can take screen grabs for old maps, and they're very valuable for local history. So I'd recommend the National Library of Scotland website. Somebody said that deposits went to an Edinburgh library. Well, I think that's the National Library of Scotland, isn't it? That's what you mean. Now Glenn is trying to come in there. I think, Glenn, you were talking about print on demand. Now, print on demand is used by professional publishers. I mean, Oxford University Press have very rare books that they print one copy of when you order it. And I know that that there are some local history publishers that basically upload files to Amazon, and Amazon will print on demand and send them the money. So that is a way to go forward. You can always print a few copies on demand for yourself, so that you can keep a few copies around. But I do think this business about survival is important. I mean, I don't think it's just being old-fashioned. But of course, a lot of academic journals these days are not printed. They're just online. But then academic journals, particularly in the sciences, tend not to have a lot of value after 10 years, say. But I personally feel that even if you are doing an electronic version, please do produce a few hard copies and distribute them around so that your work will survive. Debbie,
Sorry, if I can interrupt, Barry, can I get in?
Yeah.
Print on Demand is a company. Print on Demand Worldwide. I haven't got shares, but when producing our books, we found them as enormously helpful if you ask them on design, and you can very easily get quotes. You can play with the quotes for hardback, softback, changing the size, changing the numbers of illustrations. You can instantly, in your design, learn what the cost implications of any change are going to be. Also, as you said, it's remarkably cheap nowadays. But yes, they will simultaneously produce an e-version as well as the print, if you wish. But I was always saying I use Serif Page Plus, and I haven't got shares in them either. But that is very easy alongside the PDF. They will produce an e-version. Very easy nowadays.
May I just give your name out so that you can help others if they want to come and talk to you about this?
Yeah, sure, because we had to learn the hard way.
Yeah. This is Glenn Gilbertson speaking from Alsford, isn't it, Glenn?
Yes, Alsford Historical and Literary Society. And I said to earlier, well, our biggest problem when I produced my book on our local war dead was to try to get a straight answer from a well-known bookshop when we were still designing. How big do we make it? What if we produce a book, what can you sell at what price? Could we get a straight answer? Could we? Until it was actually one of his staff who eventually said, oh, I can answer the question. Less than £20, even if it's 1995, with a stiff soft cover, we can shift. If you go to hardcover, it'll be fewer, but you've got to go to 40 quid. So we designed it so that with a printing cost of give or take a tenner, then we could sell at give or take just the right side of 20. But to try to get a straight answer from many booksellers on, if we put it on your shelves, what will you pay us to put it on your shelves so that you can make a profit and we still get something? And to try and get a straight answer, good luck. Maybe you've all had a better success. Finish a rant, but I hope that's helpful because it's very important at the design stage.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. Another question that's come in, Barry, I think it was, mentioned that the Archives Trust is a source of finance for publishing, obviously a grant application. But do either Roger or Barry know of other sources of finance that might help people publish?
Not really. I mean, do you know of any, Roger? I mean, for local history publication, I suppose the Heritage Lottery Fund might work.
It might do. Yes, in the context of other things, I would suspect, rather than just for a single publication. I think that's right. No, I can't help I'm afraid on. No,
I mean, time was long ago that you could go to a publisher and say, I've got a good idea for a local history book. And,
yes, well,
but those days are longer. I was trying to think which one it was that. Well, it doesn't really matter because they no longer do it. But that used to be a course, but it doesn't seem to be available anymore. I have another one here from someone who is interested in how to find someone who could read your book through. I assume that's.
Yes.
Yeah, I assume that's for someone who wants the sort of referee thing rather than is proofreading it for you.
Yes, I would pick up that point and reinforce what Barry was saying. It is absolutely vital, I think, to get other people to read your work. I mean, that's why if you are a member of a local history group, the assumption would be that you would find a critical friend from amongst the members who would be willing to read that for you. And I just throw this in for the representatives of local history group with us today, that possibly that be opened up as a sort of formal activity for the group, to see if they could get a pool of people who would be willing to engage in that particular role. Having a critical friend, I know from my own experience, has been extremely useful. And because you, as the author, get so immersed in a subject, it's often difficult to stand back and see what you've written looked like from someone from the outside. So I do feel that groups that are keen on publishing might see this as something that they could develop and perhaps formalize, you know, just circulate the members and say, is anyone willing to fulfill this role?
The only point I'd make there, Roger, is I think every project is different. I think, you know, when you work on a project, you know individuals who are in a similar area. I think most of us are quite happy to read other people's stuff, particularly if, you know, we learn something anyway. But it's well worth doing. There are a couple of things there, Sue, which Debbie's come in with a she's very fond of a word indexing program. Does it automatically, but I guess it's, yeah, I mean, having done a bit of indexing, you know, you've got to know a bit about the subject, and just to index it mechanically, I don't know what that's like. I don't know whether Debbie can tell us.
Can I just say, well, I mean, the only thing I've ever done is a WordPress of the local history of Southview that I did, and just to say, I lodged copies of that with the library and with the record office, so they are there. But my main aim really was to get the thing out for free. So that was really important to me. And having written it, you know, I just asked Word to index it, and they indexed it, and it needed a little bit of editing and twitching about after that, you know, because it would pick up every John where I just wanted John Burgess Soper. But, you know, we got there and it was really surprisingly simple. And that was just a Word document. So, you know, worth a go, I think.
Okay. And also Tom Woodcock is recommending Scrivener. I don't know if Tom can tell us about Scrivener.
Yeah, hello Barry. As
Hi,
you know,
Tom.
I'm a medical practitioner, so the stuff I've published has tended to be fairly complicated. But I have for many years now depended on two things really. One is a reference manager. And one of the things that I would say that you should do is to put into that database all your pictures, all your references, all your books. It'll help you lay them out nicely. And when it then comes to writing your text in Word or whatever you're going to use, you can just insert reference, and you can automatically change the way the references are laid out. If you move the text around and you've got numbered references, as you remember, Barry, it gets hideously, it gets like a fishing line.
You've got to keep renumbering, yeah.
You've got to renumber, but if you've got something like a reference manager, it does that. The one I use is called Bookends. Bookends by Sunny. They're in California. In the 10 or 15 years so far, I think they've asked me to pay twice, you know, once when I bought version 5 and again when I bought version 10. I haven't spent 100 quid on it, but it's brilliant. You've got all your data there. And once you've done that, you can write anything.
Tell you what, I tell you what, Sue, I think there's a good future talk coming up here, because we've got all, we've had Debbie, we've had Len, we've now got Tom, and I'm sure there are others. Sorry if I've missed some of your chats, but what we could do is in 40 minutes, we could have 5 minutes, as it were, on each of these things, or 10 minutes.
The technical aspects, yes, what would make your life easier. Yeah, I think that would be good.
What do you think about
that? When this recording will go to the cloud in the first instance, and nobody really needs to know, but I will send a copy of it to Barry and to Roger. but you get a copy of the chats as well, Barry. So if you want to,
we can do an edited sort of.
You'll have comments from people, and you can. I mean, Alan, for instance, has asked for a copy of the slides, but and Michaela, I don't know if Michaela is still with us. She talks about having had 6 proofreaders as part of their editorial team. That sounds very
lucky.
Very grand, yes. Or whether that would help with the reading, I'm not sure.
Is Michaela there? I noticed that comment, and I wondered which particular group she's associated with.
Yeah, the participants have dropped down to 42 now, so I think a number of people have left.
I think Michaela has departed.
Yes.
No, I'm still here.
Ah, excellent.
Oh, hi, Michaela. Which group are you with, please?
Roger, that was with the Friends of St James Park for their project on the history of St James Park.
Oh,
yes.
Right. Yes.
Now with the Shirley Local History Group. But that project was for them, so we had a really big team of volunteers for that.
I should have known that, since I'm a member of Shirley Local History Group. Oh dear,
Right,
failed again. No, it's interesting that you were able to get a team of people to undertake a task which some people might balk at, and we've had the discussion earlier, but I would certainly commend that, and I think maybe one or two others with us this evening might be a little bit envious of the numbers that you were able to.
Yes, and I'd echo the comments of someone earlier that about you don't see the faults or the problems in your own work, and I think that's also sometimes true. In a way, the more people that proofread for you, the more chances that you have of ironing out problems, because how often do your eyes just skip over the wrong spelling of something, or
it's also important long before that, I think, when you're forming things. And often, I mean, it must happen to most people here that you're researching something and you come across something and you think, oh, that's jolly interesting. I know Sue's interested in that. And you sort of exchange. And I think getting people to read your stuff. My wife is a great critic. It's very useful in just getting a general molding the material, because you always end up with more stuff than you need, don't you?
Definitely. And
you just have to sort of. It's almost like sculpting. You have to sort of get it into shape.
Well, I think this has been fascinating. If I may suggest we draw it to a conclusion, we've been going for just over an hour and 10 minutes or so now. So thank you, everybody. And I think on everybody's behalf, I think we need to give Barry and Roger a big thank you, because I think that's opened quite a lot of avenues for many people. And hopefully we'll see lots of articles and newsletters and books even potentially arising from that. As I say, watch out for this I think Barry sends a link when it goes to YouTube, or Roger, one of you will send a link so that people, if they wish to look at this again, can do so. I'll remind everybody that if you're a member of Hampshire Archives Trust, you can also join the Field Club, and if you're a member of the Field Club, you can also join the Trust. And this was a free talk, and if you would care to make a donation to either body, you can do so through their websites. But thank you very much. And for interest, Barry, we reached 63 people. So you did have
a fantastic audience. I just wish I could have shaken a few hands, but fantastic.
Absolutely.
Yes,
Well,
I would echo that.